Good evening, and welcome to Skep Talk, the monthly speaker series hosted by the Bay Area Skeptics. Before tonight's presentation, a few words about Bay Area Skeptics. As North America's oldest skeptical organization, we are dedicated to promoting critical thinking, logic, and rational thought. In the 1970s and 80s, scientists such as Carl Sagan and magicians such as James Randi established the scientific skepticism movement out of concern about the popular fondness for pseudoscience and the lack of public science literacy. Scientific skepticism embraces evidence-based civil discourse on health, education, consumer protection, and especially the investigation of extraordinary claims. Using the scientific method, we hope to promote skeptical inquiry to reduce irrational thinking in society. This talk is supported by Bay Area Skeptics members such as you. Please visit us at baskeptics.org or join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Meetup. Consider supporting us through convenient monthly donations via Patreon. Patrons receive premiums such as discounts and free t-shirts for our annual Skeptical Conference. But more importantly, members help us make the world just a little more reasonable and rational. And now, tonight's speaker.
Good evening. I'm Eugenie Scott. I'm the president of Bay Area Skeptics. By way of introducing our guest tonight, let me just mention as an aside that I have published in Science and Nature and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Cell, and a number of other very well-known and very eminent journals. But the article that I'm proudest of is one that I published in the journal that is edited by tonight's guest. Where else would I have had the opportunity to publish with two Nobel laureates and Stephen Hawking as co-authors? Among, I should add, the 426 other co-authors of this article. Not to put too fine a point on it, but it was really fun. Our guest tonight is Mark Abrahams, who started his professional life as a lowly math major from Harvard, went on to become a software programmer, and, as he puts it, founded a company that wasn't quite as successful as that of his classmate, Bill Gates, and then went on to find his true calling in life, which is as a science journalist, editor, humorist. We'll see examples of that tonight. The host of the annual Ig Nobel Prizes, as well as the editor of my favorite scientific publication, the Annals of Improbable Research, or AIR. I would like to welcome to Bay Area Skeptics my friend, Mark Abrahams. Hello, Mark, and thanks so much for coming tonight.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you for that nice introduction.
And I'm so glad you wore your top hat.
Yeah, this is a chapeau claque, which, as you may all know, is collapsible. That's the French name, claque, coming from the noise it makes. And this is what I wear at the Ig Nobel ceremony. The red things are new. I'll explain them if you like.
Please do. Please do.
Oh, okay. All right.
I will twist your arm accordingly.
There's a whole series of things to explain for people who are new to this, but I'll plunge into the middle kind of randomly. The Ig Nobel ceremony happens once a year. At the ceremony every year, we pick a theme, not for the prizes that we hand out at the ceremony, but for everything else. There's a new opera every year and all sorts of stuff. This year, the theme is water. And I'll be wearing, and other people will be that night, a bunch of models of water molecules, H2O. That's what you see here.
Very good. Well, why don't I get out of the way and you take the stage, as it were, as you are so aptly able to do. And I will see you after your talk, and we'll answer some questions from our audience. Looking forward to it.
All right, thanks. And if it's possible for people to ask questions while I'm talking, I'm quite happy to be interrupted and sidetracked. And I'm sure Jeannie will find a way to bring those to my attention. So this is about improbable research and the Ig Nobel Prizes. The magazine is called the Annals of Improbable Research. And by improbable, we mean not what people expect. It's just unexpected. And that's, of course, what most science is about. It's trying to figure out things that nobody has yet managed to figure out. And every year since 1991, we've had a ceremony at which we give 10 prizes, Ig Nobel Prizes, for things that make people laugh and then think. Things about anything, many about science, but many about other things. But they're all quite real. We get something like 10,000 new nominations in a typical year. I'd like to begin with a little acknowledgement, I guess is the word, for a past Ig Nobel Prize winner who died today. You may have seen it in the news. His name is Pat Robertson. He shared in the year 2011 the Ig Nobel Mathematics Prize. I'd like to, as a tribute to him, read you the citation for that 2001 Ig Nobel Mathematics Prize. It was awarded to Dorothy Martin of the USA, who predicted the world would end in 1954, and to Pat Robertson of the USA, who predicted the world would end in 1982, and to Elizabeth Clare Prophet of the USA, who predicted the world would end in 1990, and to Lee Jang-rim of Korea, who predicted the world would end in 1992, and to Credonia Mwerinde of Uganda, who predicted the world would end in 1999, and to Harold Camping of the USA, who predicted the world would end on September 6th, 1994, and who later predicted that the world would end on October 21st, 2011. They all shared that Ig Nobel Prize for teaching the world to be careful when making mathematical assumptions and calculations. So again, congratulations to all of those co-winners from 2011, and especially to Pat Robertson, who today, I guess we could say, celebrated his final recalibration. So I'll talk a little bit about these prizes. These are all real. The winners, we offer them the prizes in almost every case and give them the opportunity to say no if they want to, but almost everybody accepts, and almost everybody comes to the ceremony, which we have. I'm here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in my office with our little museum behind me. The ceremony happens at Harvard University, at least it always did in pre-pandemic days. We've been doing it on the internet only the last 3 years because of the pandemic. We've got the 10 winners, some of which are teams, come from around the world. A bunch of Nobel laureates also come to the ceremony and shake the hands of the winners and hand them their Ig Nobel Prizes. The audience, which was always a sellout, about 1,200 people fit in that auditorium. Beautiful old theater, and it's also the largest classroom at Harvard. And many of the people who come in the audience bring stacks of paper, which they turn into things like this, paper airplanes. So you have a 90-minute long ceremony with 1,200 people throwing paper airplanes and people on stage throwing them back. You can look up details of all the past winners. There are, 320 of them on our website, improbable.com. I'm going to show you some things that have won Ig Nobel Prizes and mention a few other things. And then again, if you have some questions, I would be very happy to get sidetracked or whatever. This is an object that many of you will recognize, I think. It's called a brazier. And this is an especially nicely tailored one, but it's a special one. This was invented, this particular kind of brazier, it was invented by Dr. Elena Bodnar in Chicago. She got her medical degree in Ukraine, and that figures into the story. So this is, what makes this special is, this is a brazier that in an emergency can be separated into a pair of protective face masks. One to perhaps save your life, and one to save the life of some lucky bystander. Dr. Bodnar got her medical degree in Ukraine, and not too long after that, the Chernobyl power plant, which is also in Ukraine, melted down. She was one of the doctors who treated victims of the Chernobyl power plant meltdown. And she and some of the other doctors over the years have periodically gotten in touch with some of the patients they treated because they wanted to see how this medical story played out. They thought they understood what was going on medically, but it turned out there was a surprise. And what they say was the biggest surprise for them was they had expected that most of the bad medical damage would be the effects of radiation on people's skin when they were outdoors. And that was not the worst thing. The worst thing was that the air was filled with tiny radioactive particles that people breathed in. And once people breathed those things in, those things tended to stay forever in their lungs. And that was very bad news. So she, once they figured that out, obsessed about this and was trying always to think of something that people anywhere could do or have around so that in case of some sudden emergency, when the air is full of dangerous stuff, people could quickly protect themselves, at least for a few minutes. So maybe they could get indoors where the air might be a little safer. And she moved to Chicago, got on the faculty of the University of Chicago Medical School. She and her husband had a baby. And one day she was in their apartment and their infant son was sitting on the floor, picked up his mother's bra and put it over his face. And that's where Dr. Elena Bodnar got the idea for the emergency bra. We gave her the Ig Nobel Prize. This was, I forget which year, but it's about 12, 15 years ago now. She came to the Ig Nobel ceremony, and this was the first public demonstration of this. There is a patent, which you can look up, and the patent is quite a beautiful piece of engineering with drawings and detailed description. She is quite a lovely woman and dresses in beautiful clothing and carries herself like a star, which she is. She gave her speech, and we keep all the speeches really short. The winners get to talk longer than anybody else, and they get about 1 minute. We have some timing mechanisms that we have invented, which seem to work pretty well. And she spoke a few words, and then she reached down inside her cleavage, pulled out her bra, and said she was going to demonstrate it. And she looked across the stage where there were a bunch of Nobel laureates sitting there, quite amused because the winners are secret until we introduce them on stage. And she invited 3 of them to come assist her. And so they did. And the looks on their faces were very interesting. And they're all standing there quite proud and quite embarrassed. And she then proceeded to put one of these on the face of one of the Nobel laureates. I think Paul Krugman may have been the first one. And then put the second thing on the face of another of these Nobel laureates, and then went back to the microphone, spoke into the microphone and said, when you have an occasion like this, you should be prepared. And so she reached inside her dress, pulled out a second bra, separated it into 2 parts, put one of these on the face of the 3rd Nobel laureate, put the 4th one over her face, bowed, and left. All took about maybe 90 seconds. It was quite astonishing. You can see the video of all this stuff on the website. She got quite a bit of attention in the press. Ig Nobel Prize winners get a lot of attention around the world, everywhere, in pretty much every language. And she got so much attention that she decided, and so much demand, that she decided to start a company to manufacture and sell these emergency bras. That's the name she came up with. It's the emergency bra. You can look her up on the web, look up their website. And she got, I think, a couple of factories in China to manufacture these. And there are now thousands of people around the world wearing these every day. And it was kind of amusing the last few years during the pandemic to see that a whole bunch of other people in a whole bunch of other places invented essentially this same thing, although a lot of them either are not aware or didn't acknowledge where they got it. And I'll mention there is a lot of nice engineering in this thing. She thought it's important if you're in an extremely dangerous, changing, sudden situation to have your hands free. So there are extra straps on here so that once it's on your face, hands are free. And it's also got the kind of wires in here so you can adjust it to cover your nose and fit tightly. And of course, most people were not familiar with that until the pandemic hit. A lot of the things that have won Ig Nobel Prizes have stories connected with them that will lead you off in many directions that you probably don't expect. I'll show you a few other things. This won an Ig Nobel Prize a few years ago. It was jointly worked on by a joint team, partly at Georgia Tech in the US, partly at the University of Tasmania in Australia. The clear part is not the part they just put that on as a demonstration. It's the thing inside, which before I tell you, maybe you can figure out what this is. They won the Ig Nobel Physics Prize for analyzing how this stuff comes into existence. This is wombat poo. This is poo from a wombat. And at least 2 species of wombat are, I believe, the only mammals known who produce cube-shaped poo. So that's why these scientists won their Ig Nobel Physics Prize, for figuring out at least most of the physics of why this stuff and how this stuff comes to be cube-shaped, unlike all other known poo. If you yourself happen to produce cubic poo, there are some physicists who would love to talk to you. Get in touch with me. I'll put you in touch with them if you want. See, this is the sample size of a much larger box, which has a product inside. And the inventor of this, it's DNA Cologne. Bijan of Beverly Hills, a very good and expensive perfume designer based in Beverly Hills, invented this and put it on sale. It was quite expensive. I'm not sure if it's still on sale. And I think it was 1995 won the Ig Nobel Chemistry Prize for this. And it's got several interesting things. Inside, it's a helix-shaped bottle. And again, this is the sample size. The real one is much bigger and much nicer, but the same size, same shape. Some curious things about it. For one thing, the spiral is the opposite of the way the spiral goes in the DNA that's in all known forms of life on Earth. It says on the box, product does in tiny print, which you can sort of see here. Product does not contain deoxyribonucleic acid. One of the Nobel laureates who was present the evening this was presented, in fact, who had won, this is Rich Roberts, who won his Nobel Prize for discoveries about DNA. He's co-discoverer of what's used to be called junk DNA. He pointed out that if this stuff is made in a factory where there are human beings at work, even though it says there's no deoxyribonucleic acid inside, there's DNA because contamination happens. And it's pretty much unavoidable. And there's a third curious thing about it, which I've forgotten, which I'm sure was interesting and you can look up. And then this, you may be familiar with this product. The inventor of this won an Ig Nobel Prize. This is called Clocky. Clocky is an alarm clock that escapes from you. Once it starts to make noise, it jumps off the table or wherever you have it, and it runs around and hides, and you have to chase it. And this too has been put on sale, and a whole company is formed around it with other products. So that's a little bit of a sampling of stuff. Again, there are 10 of these every year. The ceremony this year will happen again only online. It will be on September 14th. It's a Thursday night. The winners have already been chosen. The Nobel laureates, most of them are lined up. We've got, I think, 10 lined up so far to be presenting the prizes. There'll be other stuff, a new opera, all sorts of things going on. And I'll mention 1 or 2 other winners right now that just plucked somewhat at random. But one of them, I'll give you the quick way of looking it up later for details, and then I'll tell you a little bit about it now. The quick way is just write down 4 words, the following 4 words. TED Talk. You probably are familiar with the TED Talk. So the 4 words are TED Talk, Dead Duck. TED Talk, Dead Duck. You'll see a 12 or 15-minute talk, which might change your life. The story of that, 2003, the Ig Nobel Biology Prize was awarded to a Dutch biologist. He works at the Natural History Museum in the city of Rotterdam for something that he had noticed. He studies birds. That's his main profession. He's an ornithologist. His name is Kees Moeilijker. He noticed something one day, and he took notes and photographs and told a lot of people about it, but took a few years to write a scientific report about it at the urging of everybody, especially all the scientists he told the story to. And he published it in a Dutch biology journal that's compared to the journals that you heard mentioned before is not all that well known. But one of the people who reads it sent us a copy. And Kees Moeilijker's report in there is titled something like the first scientifically reported case of homosexual necrophilia in the mallard duck. And I will pretty much guarantee to you that if you're not already familiar with the story, it's really not what you expect, no matter what you expect. Okay, now I'm seeing some stuff pop up here that we have some questions. Jeannie, if it's possible for you to just pop back up and speak the questions, that'll be a little easier for me. Because stuff's popping up. I can see one of them. The original, from Peter, the original tagline that we used for the Ig Nobel Prizes was that they're awarded for achievements that cannot or should not be reproduced. And then after a few years, we changed that. It's now for, the wording is for things, for achievements that make people laugh and then think. The reason we changed it was it took us about 6 or 7 or 8 years to come up with clearer, more concise wording. It takes a long time to reduce the wording. Originally, when it said for achievements that cannot or should not be reproduced, that was really just part of it. If you were the very first person in the world to do something, that firstness, being the first, could not legitimately be reproduced by anybody. So really, even that first wording covered everything in the world, but it was not as clear as we liked. And it was a lesson for us, which I'll pass on in case it's useful to you, that almost the moment we came up with the simpler, clearer wording, makes people laugh, then think, everything got easier and everything got better, because most people could almost instantly understand a lot better the essence of what we're doing. So words matter. And I want to mention a bit about that. When we, as a large number of people, there are roughly 100 people involved in making the decisions about who the prize winners are every year. And it happens in a lot of meetings, most of them quite informal. And these people are scattered across many countries. And we know that the news of the new Ig Nobel Prize winners every year is going to get reported in the news pretty much everywhere. Almost all the big wire services in the world carry it. Many of the big TV networks, most of the big newspapers around the world. And it's going to be translated into all those languages. So most people, when they hear about the winners, some of them will have been at the ceremony, some of them will have been watching the live webcast, but most of them are going to hear about it a few hours or a day or two or a week or whatever later when they read the news somewhere online, in a newspaper, hear it on TV, wherever. So they're going to get it not from us directly, but they're going to get it from somebody else. That's why we take a lot of care and arguing to try with the wording of every citation to make it really simple and really clear and really accurate and without many adjectives. What we're trying to do is just tell the story of each of these things so clearly that when you, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what your background is, when you first hear of one of these things, if we've done a good job, your immediate reaction will just be to laugh, for whatever reason, or maybe it's hard to come up with a reason, but probably because mainly it's just so surprising. It's almost a physical reaction. But if we've chosen well, there will be a second part of the reaction, which is for the next few days, maybe even weeks, you won't want to do anything except tell your friends about this stuff and argue about this stuff. So that's the quality we look for. And we know it's going to end up being translated by a lot of news people and other people into other languages. So we're trying always to make our wording so bulletproof that when it gets translated into every other language, it's still going to be the same story, even if the translator messes up a little bit. And it's a more difficult thing than that also, because news organizations are generally not one person. So by the time you see a news report anywhere, it's been through several hands, and the wording has usually been manipulated by one or two or more editors and writers. So we try very hard to come up with wording that, even passing through all of that, will still be telling exactly the same story. And it's kind of fun to do that, and it's a lot of work to do that at the same time. So let's see, Jeannie, if you have some other questions that you can bring up that people are asking, please do. Do you have some other questions people have been asking? And if you unmute yourself, that might help too.
Oh, okay. Geez, you're picky. Let's see.
Yeah, sorry about that.
NetmoreTube says, what are the mechanisms you use to limit the presentees to a minute? Would that CNN would have been privy to your methods? Yeah, I'm picturing it now as you explained.
Yeah, not just CNN. I think pretty much everybody has had to sit in a room where some kind of public event is happening. And after you've reached the age of maybe 10 in school and have to sit through a lot of assemblies, you kind of recognize the body language of some of these important people who get up there, because you know that once they start talking, you are trapped, maybe for a long time. And at the ceremony includes lots of different things. We try to take all of those horrible moments we've had to endure, all of us, and put them in the ceremony upside down and run at high speed some way. So what we do about this, the first few years, we didn't really know very well how to control speeches. If you're the one who's organizing, or you're part of the group that's organizing this stuff, or you've invited these people to talk, you don't want to just come out there and tell them to stop bluntly that way, because you don't want to embarrass them. They were nice enough to come, even if they've done something that may be a little iffy. They were nice enough to come and get up on stage and do that. And you don't want to be painting them in some bad way to the audience. You don't want them to walk away with bad feelings. But how do you do that? We finally came up with our strongest method, which works on stage, although it involves a very careful choice that needs to be made. And I want to emphasize that. If you want to try this yourself, don't just do it. Think about it before. At the Ig Nobel ceremony, at the start of the ceremony, I explained to the winners how it's going to work. Every year we go out and we recruit a very cute 8-year-old child, usually an 8-year-old girl, who has a special quality, which you might think of as ice water in her veins. There's something about that age, 8. I don't know what it is, but it seems to exist mainly at that age for about a year. It's not all kids, and it's more often found in girls than in boys. But they have the ability to control what happens in a room filled with adults better than any adult. I'm sure, have run into a few kids like that. And when there is a kid like that in the neighborhood or in the school, a lot of the other parents are very aware of that. And that's how we always find our little girl every year, is we talk to parents and they tell us about a new 8-year-old who has that quality. And we meet with her and her parents to make sure that, yes, she does, and she's very comfortable, and the parents are comfortable. She sits on stage. I introduce her at the start of the ceremony, and I explain that whenever this little girl feels that somebody has talked long enough, she will let them know. And I ask her to demonstrate. So this little tiny cute little girl gets up and walks all the way across the stage over to the person who's up at the microphone talking. and looks up at that person who's talking, and she looks up at them and she says, "Please stop. I'm bored. Please stop. I'm bored. Please stop. I'm bored. Please stop. I'm bored." She doesn't stop until they do. And it works. So we have yet to see an adult who can withstand that. And after several years of that, people watch the webcast and they see the videos previous years. So some of the newer winners after that came prepared with all sorts of stuff, trying to bribe her, everything. But these kids, they have been equal and more than equal to anything the adults have thrown at them. So that has been our main mechanism. We have a lot of other mechanisms as well. During the past 3 pandemic years, when we've been doing the ceremony as an online thing, we have not used that mechanism because it works much better in person, because everybody is very aware of everybody else's reactions to each other and everything. But it doesn't work quite so well if you're just doing it as a video thing. So we have other methods, and we're always experimenting and curious to find more.
And Peter M. asks, when did people start publishing research with the actual intention of trying to get an Ig Nobel? What's one of your favorite examples of where they succeeded?
We were very lucky when we started this the first year that a lot of things went well, and we were able to do the ceremony and get an audience spilling out the doors, and get some famous scientists who were part of it, and get some winners, and get some reporters who came from a lot of different countries. And it got huge amounts of press around the world. So the next year we were able to do it on a bigger scale, and the year after that a bigger scale. And this is now the 33rd year, and this just continues. So, but without luck that first year, we wouldn't have done it. So after that very first one, we started to get little trickles and then floods of people nominating other people or themselves for the prize. Every year, pretty consistently, something like 10 to 20% of all the nominations that come in are people who nominate themselves. They almost never win. And there have been a few who nominated themselves who've won, but very few. And I'm pretty sure that none of the winners set out to win an Ig Nobel Prize. That was not their intent at all. There are a lot of nominations that come in that clearly are done because somebody wanted to win an Ig Nobel Prize, and sometimes people even tell us that. But at least so far, all of those, thousands, all of them, everyone lacks this joint quality of it'll make anybody laugh and then think. It's a very curious thing, that pair of things. It's a side effect. It's don't try to aim for it. If you want to win an Ig Nobel Prize, if you really do, just live your life. Be yourself. Do whatever is driving you, and let fate be your friend if it's willing to.
David Almond-Smith asks, have you considered live streaming the event on a major carrier, Netflix, Prime, some other?
Yeah, we 1995, we webcast it ourselves for the first time live. Years later, it was pointed out to us that that was one of the very first webcasts of any kind. We were kind of having to invent some of the technology. It was a couple of computer science grad students at Harvard who suggested it. And
you're pioneers.
Yeah, of necessity. We were trying to just get the signal from one place to another, and one of them came up with the idea that rather than we had an overflow auditorium across the street in another Harvard building, but there was no wire connecting the two, and not directly. So he pointed out that if we just drop the signal onto a particular part of the internet, it was called the M bone. I'm not sure if it still exists, that we could pick it up on the other side of the street and project it. And then a couple minutes later, pointed out that, hey, we can tell anybody else on the internet and they can watch too. So that's how our webcast started. And we, every year as the internet was growing and getting more robust and more people were involved and more equipment was available, we would cobble together better and better equipment. And then YouTube came along, and I think we were the very first live event webcast on YouTube. This question of, are you going to put it on, the major networks or whatever, has come up many times, and we've been approached by lots of people, but those things always have somehow not happened. It's not within our power to make these networks come and get actually interesting real programming, which is what we are, believe it or not. So we would love to have that happen. And if the person who asked the question is in a position to make this happen, get in touch with me, please.
It reminds me of the story an old friend of mine told me. He said people fall in love either for love. People get married either for love or for money. And what he was going to do is go to where the rich people were and fall in love. And the trouble with that is that they may not be falling in love with you. So CNN, big media companies, they should fall in love with you. This would be a wonderful thing to have a bigger audience.
Well, this reminds me that one other thing that has happened many times along the way, we've had many waltzes with people from networks in a lot of different countries. And what's happened many times, that this is the essential story of most of what happens in the TV industry to everybody. So this is not just us. This is an old story to almost everybody, is projects start up. We've had several projects start up, big ones. And then somebody high up in the network leaves. They get fired or they go to work for another network, and pretty much everything underneath them gets canceled. So I have a lot of respect, I think is the word, for people who work a long time in the TV industry, because that's their everyday reality. Anything they're working on is liable to suddenly get killed with almost no notice, and yet they go on. That's not the easiest way to have your profession go.
Well, believe me, there is an audience for what you do. I wish it could have a wider one.
Oh, thanks.
James,
I also want to mention, we have been webcasting some years in various languages, teaming up with much larger organizations in Japan many years, in China some years. There's a group in South America that some years has done a Spanish language version of the webcast, and
that's cool.
That's been fun to do, and we're hoping to do more of that.
Indeed. James Salzman has a question. Have you ever had to retract a publication or rescind an award for turning out to be more serious than originally thought?
Not for that purpose, no. What's serious got to do with anything? And also, what does serious mean? And I'm serious in asking that question. The essence of the things that win prizes, the reason they win prizes really is that to most people, they're so outside their experience that they are, surprising, bordering on shocking. And that's sort of the history of everything in science. Almost everything that all of us learn in school, the famous discoveries, the story that we walk away from, at least my impression all through school and for a while afterward, was when this thing was discovered or that thing was discovered, almost instantly, everybody in the science world recognized how great it was. And it became a part of science and a part of humanity, part of culture. But that's not the way things usually work. In fact, almost nothing ever works that way. I've been doing this a long time, and I now have been, happily meeting an awful lot of people whose lives are being professional scientists. And some of them are people who made some of those discoveries that became famous, and some of them even became quite powerful and rich and all that stuff. But the story, if you really look into it on almost any of these things, and if you talk to any of these people and get them to relax and tell it about the very earliest stage of something, is usually not this glorious thing. It's that when they first came up with the idea, or they first noticed this thing different from what everybody else expected or thought, when they first found it and told people, there's just a handful of things that happen. One is people say, no, that doesn't happen. That's wrong. Or people say that's stupid, or people laugh at them. Or the most common of all, Nobody else has any interest. They just won't pay any attention at all. But some of these things, eventually somebody does pay attention and realizes this stuff is useful or important or something. After that happens, the story changes. And if it turns into one of these big things, the kind of thing that eventually is going to get taught to every kid in school that we all now know about, after a very short time, the original story disappears. It's not a story of any confusion. It's a story of glory and the world being smart enough to recognize how wonderful this stuff was. But that's really not what happened.
Indeed. Well, continue. If there are more questions, we'll slip them in, because you did say that it was okay to interrupt you. So feel free to interrupt him. He's a casual kind of guy.
In the absence of interruptions, I've got a list of some of the winners here. With 320 winners, I don't have them all immediately in mind, so I printed out a few. I'm going to mention a few, just plucking them for no particular dramatic reason. One of the prizes last year went to a team in South America who studied whether and how constipation affects the mating prospects of scorpions. You can read the details in the paper they wrote about it. You can also see them. You can see most of these people in the videos from the past Ig Nobel ceremonies, and a lot of them have a lot of videos and news things that you can find just by Googling them. So I'll repeat that for anybody who is wondering whether they actually heard what I said. This team won for studying whether and how constipation affects the mating prospects of scorpions. We also gave a prize last year to a team who, this was the literature prize. We many years give a prize in the field of literature. They won the literature prize last year for analyzing what makes legal documents unnecessarily difficult to understand. We also gave a prize last year in the field of applied cardiology. And by the way, about categories, this is something people ask all the time. Most prizes for things in the world have a set list of categories every year, best movie or whatever. We don't really. We pick the winners first, and then we try to figure out what category to assign to each of them. And some of the categories recur pretty much every year. We almost always have a physics prize, a biology prize, and some others. But sometimes we have to do some work to invent a category. And I'll mention one or two examples of that. A prize we gave 20, must be getting close to 25 years ago, I think, or 23 years ago, went to a Canadian inventor named Troy Hurtubise, lived in North Bay, Canada, which is quite a ways north of Toronto. Troy won an Ig Nobel Prize because he had spent, how many years? 7 or 8 years by that point, designing and personally testing a suit of armor that would protect him against grizzly bears. Troy wanted to be able to go out in the woods and spend time with grizzly bears, but he wanted to not get killed doing that. So, and he also didn't have any money or large institution behind him or anything like that. So he went to the town dump and he scrounged equipment, starting out with some old hockey equipment, pads and things, and then made them more and more elaborate. And he did a series of tests of having people throw rocks at him and then hit him with sledgehammers. And as the suit got more elaborate and stronger, the tests also got more elaborate and more forceful. He was having people video record a lot of this. So there's a lot of film. The Canadian Film Board made a documentary movie, which is quite a wonderful documentary called Project Grizzly. It's online. You can go and see it free, Project Grizzly, which documents all the early years of Troy testing this stuff. So Troy won a prize for this. What category do you assign this to? The Ig Nobel Prize for what category goes for this? And we agonized for a while. We finally came up with safety engineering. So Troy won the Ig Nobel Prize for Safety Engineering, I think in 1998 or 9. And I believe we've given that same category once or twice since, including last year. We gave another prize last year in the field of safety engineering to an engineer in Sweden who 20 years ago invented a moose crash test dummy. In Sweden and other places, but especially in Sweden, there are a lot of mooses out there on the roads, and a lot more collisions between mooses and automobiles than anybody wants. And some of them have not happy endings, those collisions. So he, when he was in grad school, invented a crash test dummy, the size and approximate shape of a moose. And that ended up over the years being used by a lot of automobile manufacturers around the world. If you go to Sweden, or if you've been to Sweden, you may have noticed on the roads there are a lot of signs with a colorful graphic depicting a moose and an automobile. Those signs, after the government started putting them up, became so popular with tourists that they were being stolen. And eventually the government decided, rather than fight that, to start making extra signs which they sell to tourists. So, these signs are now a part of the legend connected to all this stuff. So that stuff. Any other questions, Jeannie, from anybody? Okay, and you've been muted by evil forces again.
Apologies, I muted myself. Lots of the Bay Area Skeptics pseudo name.
Mhm.
Lots of pseudoscience promoters get nominated to Ig Nobel Prize and they don't get it because they're not funny either, but use the nomination as Nobel nomination to gain more legitimacy for their claims. Many people cannot differentiate Ig Nobel from Nobel Prize. How does the Ig Nobel team address this confusion? Or
let's take that statement. Many people cannot differentiate Ig Nobels from the Nobel Prize. Let me give you an equivalent statement. Many Americans voted for Donald Trump.
True.
Many people think he's an honest man. People are allowed to think whatever they want to think for whatever reason or lack of reason they have for thinking it.
I know that at my beat back when I was working used to be creationist, as you know, we've known each other for many years. And there were a couple of intelligent design people who were widely promoted as nominated for Nobel Prize. Well, that's a lot of hooey, because the Nobel Prize nominations are secret. People who are asked to nominate Nobel Prize winners are asked also to not mention that they are nominators, and to keep this as a very secret and a very private type of activity. So you would not know if you were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize or a scientific prize or anything else by anybody who's a legitimate nominator. In the case of one of the intelligent design proponents, he had nominated himself. So they do accept, over the transom nominations, just like you get plenty of over the transom nominations for the Iggies.
Yes, an interesting word, accept.
Yeah. They get the letters and they probably put them in a file someplace because they're Swedish, and so they're going to be compulsive. What can I say? As a Scandinavian myself, I understand compulsion. So if you nominate yourself, then you are technically not breaking a commandment. You are not lying to say that you were nominated for the Nobel Prize, but they're kind of thin on details there. I don't know of any specific examples of people nominated or receiving Nobel Iggies that have claimed themselves, that have then gone on to complain that they are actual Nobel winners. But that would be a most interesting phenomenon.
Well, there is one person who won an Ig Nobel Prize and then 10 years later was awarded a Nobel Prize.
That's even more delightful. Tell us more about
Yes,
that.
Andrei Geim. He is a physicist, and he and Michael Berry, who is another physicist, both of them quite well known, even 20 years ago when they got there. Well, this was the year 2000. They won the Ig Nobel Prize in physics that year, shared it because they used magnets to levitate a frog. Something which, if you had asked pretty much any physicist in the world if such a thing was possible, they would have told you that's crazy. But Andrei Geim did it, and then he and Michael Berry teamed up to figure out the theory that explains what happened. It turned out to be some old physics that people hadn't really been thinking about too much. And Andrei Geim has an old tradition of every week, or pretty much every week, on Friday nights, he has the people in his lab do what they call Friday night experiments, just stuff not connected with the things they're doing during the week, just things that intrigue them, that might seem a little nuts, but let's try things and see what happens. And that's how the frog thing happened. It's not just frogs that can be levitated. It's an awful lot of things can be levitated, including drops of water and strawberries. If you had strong enough magnets, a person could be levitated that way, but you need really strong magnets. And it's a matter of stability. There's some interesting and complicated math behind this stuff. 10 years later, he and one of his students were given a Nobel Prize, also in physics, for another one of these Friday night experiments they were doing. The experiment either sounds very glamorous if you want to use words that paint it that way, or it sounds like something a little kid would do, because almost every little kid has done it many times, which is you take a piece of paper and you take a pencil and you scribble all over that piece of paper with a pencil. So you get this gray stuff on it. And then you take the piece of paper and fold it and just go like this, and little flakes coming off the thing. And they examined some of those flakes. They actually picked them off with Scotch tape, with sticky tape. And what they discovered they had there were the first usable samples of a substance called graphene, which is the two-dimensional form of carbon. And chemists knew that this stuff exists. The gray stuff in the pencil is graphite. And graphite, chemists knew, is just millions of layers of this two-dimensional flat graphene, which is shaped, the chemical model shape is like chicken wire. But these layers, are so thin that they stick to each other, and nobody had been able to figure out how you get enough of it off that you start playing with it and doing experiments to measure its qualities and see if it's useful for anything, whatever, until that Friday night. And once they did, they started discovering all kinds of stuff. And you probably know there are industries around the world that have grown up completely based around this discovery and of things that have come as a result of it. But really, it was just two guys on a Friday night doing stuff that little kids do. And we were pleased, to go somewhat back to the question that was just asked about Nobel and Ig Nobel. We have tried very hard since the very beginning to be nothing but respectful of the Nobel Prizes. We do not want anybody to confuse the two. Anybody who confuses the two is either not paying any attention or they have a different way of thinking than most people.
All right.
Do.
We do have a question.
And I just want to mention that the Nobel people were very nice when Andrei Geim won his Ig Nobel Prize, that they highlighted that.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's really great. I'm so pleased that they weren't snooty about it. That's great. All right. James Salzman asks, you suggested there were other reasons for retractions and rescissions. Do you have some more examples of that?
Yeah, there was one prize we retracted from. It was from one of the very early years, and we had made the mistake of in the very earliest years, when we were just starting, and also you couldn't easily find stuff on the internet because there wasn't anything on the internet. We trusted press reports of something, and it turned out those were iffy at best. And so we retracted something from one of those first years. We have also occasionally, if it turns out that the wording of the citation we give is slightly off, we will then correct it later. And once or twice, we also have either left out a name because we made an error, or because the winners later told us that there was somebody else who was an important part. And so, of course, we're happy to add them and correct the thing. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
That sounds sensible. I think you might have answered this question. How many Nobel Prize winners have won the Ig? At least one. Any others?
Well, Andrei Geim was not a Nobel Prize winner when he won his Ig Nobel Prize. There is, if you
I don't know that the order counts.
Yeah. Well, if you want to be technical about it, there is somebody who was a Nobel Prize winner who then won an Ig Nobel Prize. But you have to be really, really technical about it. His name is Bart Knowles, and he studies insects. He's Dutch, mosquitoes especially. And he and his colleague did a whole series of experiments to try to learn what attracts the malaria-carrying mosquitoes to human beings. Trying to figure out if it attracts it, is there some way we can do something to keep mosquitoes from being attracted. They won their Ig Nobel Prize for a series of experiments where they had somebody in some of the experiments spend an entire night in a tent with 100 mosquitoes, and the person was naked. And then in the morning, they would examine exactly where on their body they were stung. But that's not exactly why they won their Ig Nobel Prize. They won their Ig Nobel Prize for discovering, they say, that there are two odors that especially attracts one of these kinds of mosquitoes. One is the odor of, what's the kind of stinky cheese?
Limburger?
Limburger cheese, yeah. And in fact, Bart grew up in Limburg. And the other odor that attracts, powerfully attracts these particular mosquitoes is human feet. And it turns out that there's a strong connection. It's the bacteria in the cheese and the bacteria on the feet that produce those odors. And long ago, Limburger cheese was made by people stomping barefoot
on the curds,
milk. And those two groups of bacteria on the cheese and on the feet are very similar, Bart said. Anyway, a few years before that, he had worked for a UN agency and everybody in that UN agency, hundreds of people, shared a Nobel Peace Prize. And so each of them got listed as a co-winner. So technically, he was a Nobel Prize winner, but he doesn't want to be out in public claiming that, and I don't think anybody else really would want to be claiming that either, for this kind of purpose.
Yeah, that in a way that's kind of like the IPCC team,
Yeah.
which is probably 100 individuals or so. It's a bunch that received a Nobel, and I don't know anybody who says I'm a Nobel winner because I served on the IPCC of 1999 or whatever it was. Yeah, that shows character. I would say that shows character. Just a comment from our Australian friend, Tim Mendon, who is with the Australian Skeptics. There's a lot of Nobel winners whose later work should qualify them for an Ig Nobel. Was by way of a comment rather than a question.
Well, yeah, I'm maybe overinterpreting that comment to say that it's an insult to get an Ig Nobel Prize, and you can choose to take it that way if you want, but that's not the way it's intended, and that's not the way most of the winners. Remember, almost with a few exceptions, but very few, we offer the prize to people secretly, quietly. And if somebody says no, that's fine. And we never tell anybody, and we instead give the prize to somebody else. Almost everybody does accept. But some good things have happened, in fact, quite a few of the winners, mainly because they get noticed. And in the world, there are lots of people, 7 billion now, 8 billion, something like that. And whether you're a scientist or anything else, no matter what you do during your lifetime, no matter how wonderful it is, or for that matter, no matter how awful it is, very few people are going to notice. If you win an Ig Nobel Prize, a lot of people are going to notice, and you are almost certainly going to get reporters from around the world writing about you, and some of them are going to even get in touch and ask you what you're doing. And some of them, this is something that we mention to all of the new winners every year now, is that when you have a reporter who's calling you up about this thing, that makes people laugh and then think, if you're comfortable with the attention, which we hope you are, of course, talk to them and tell them about it. But if you have done other things that you think really are important, whether they're funny or not, tell them. Just tell the reporters. You will make that reporter. You will give them one of the happiest professional days of their life. They're hearing a great story that has not been reported, and that has happened to quite a few of the winners, and quite a few institutions have noticed this long before we thought of this. That we started to notice even in the early years that we're getting nominations from companies. We're getting nominations from universities, occasionally from governments for some of their people, because they want the publicity if somebody wins.
Yeah. Not as prestigious as the Nobels in a certain sense of the word, but definitely prestigious.
We always like to think of it as the two are orthogonal. They're at right angles. They just don't have anything to do with each other necessarily.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm not sure that every Nobel, the real ones, so to speak, make you think.
Well,
not every.
The thing about especially the science Nobels is some of them you need to know a pretty large amount of information before you can really get a good grasp of what they're doing, and then they will make you think. But it's not information you can get in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Some of these things, and everybody's got stuff like that in your life. Everybody does things that to you they're ordinary, but then you occasionally run into somebody and it staggers you that they don't understand even the most basic thing about the most basic thing you do every day.
Well, that's certainly true. We have I think I know the answer to this, but maybe not.
Tell me the answer first, then, please.
Nobel Prizes are never awarded posthumously. Our Ig Nobel Prize.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we've given many posthumous Ig Nobel Prizes, sometimes for one member of a team, sometimes for an individual.
Has anyone shown up to receive it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And we've gone back as far as about 50 years or so. Our rule of thumb, and we don't have a lot of hard and fast rules or other rules, but we have a few rules of thumb, and it's that if there's still somebody around who knew them well, a relative or somebody who worked with them, then we'll do that. One of them I'll mention, this is a slightly complicated story, so I'll try to tell just the simple part of it, but and it's also from kind of not so far from the Bay Area that it happened. Murphy's Law. Familiar with Murphy's Law? A lot of ways of wording it, but they always come down to something like, if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. We gave an Ig Nobel Prize, I think this was also around the year 2000, somewhere around there. We gave a prize to the 3 people who are probably responsible for naming Murphy's Law. And it's connected to all kinds of great stories about science and about lots of other stuff. And there's been a beautiful book written about that question, written by Nick Spark, historian, and the book is worth reading. He spent a long time trying to dig into that question of how did Murphy's Law get its name. And the short version of the story is there was a Murphy, Captain Edward Murphy of the U.S. Army, in the division of it that shortly after that became the Air Force. And the incident happened in the late 1940s at Edwards Air Force Base in California. There, with jet engines replacing the propeller engines, there were higher speeds that were going to come into play with planes. And also people looking back at what had happened during World War II realized they hadn't really built the aircraft to withstand crashes. They'd kind of figured if a plane crashes, everybody's going to die. But it turned out there were some survivors. And if they had paid a little more attention, they might have been able to build slightly more safe aircraft. So they ran some tests out in the desert at Edwards Air Force Base where they set up some railroad tracks on this long, flat stretch and a pool of water at the end. And they had a little railroad cart, call it, with a jet engine with a rocket strapped to the back and a seat on it. So they seat a person on this thing with all kinds of instruments to measure heart rate and blood pressure and anything else they thought to measure. And they had a rocket right behind this person. They would launch this thing down the track, and then it would come to the end of the track, this pool of water, and suddenly it would decelerate. So that was the mimicking what happens in a crash. And before they ran it with a person sitting on that seat, they ran it with a dummy because they wanted to make sure they weren't going to, or try to make sure they weren't going to injure or kill somebody. And they kept running it, and then they'd look at the instruments to see what it measured. And the instruments always read 0, like this thing had never happened, like there was no collision, nothing had happened. And none of them there knew enough electronics to figure out what was going wrong. So they asked around, they learned there's this Captain Murphy out in Ohio who knows a lot of electronics. So they got him out there for, I think, 2 or 3 days. That was his only involvement in this thing. And he watched them do a test run. And then he went over and looked at the instruments. Everything was reading 0 on the gauges. And he dug into it. And then he discovered what was wrong. And he said something. Nobody wrote down the exact words. It was only later that people remember this. And so they argue. But he said something like, if it can go wrong, it will. There's disagreement still as to whether he was stating a general philosophical law and a great engineering principle, or whether he was an angry guy who was talking about a particular technician and insulting the technician who'd screwed up. And 2 camps there. So by the time we gave the prize, Murphy was no longer alive, but his son came, and the other 2 people, one of them had died. One of them was the doctor on the project who had decided he couldn't face up to the idea of letting somebody else write it. So the doctor was the one who wrote that. You may have seen old films and photos of a man's face stretching under this sudden deceleration. John Stapp is his name, and he was famous for lots of other stuff. And also, by the way, is probably more responsible than any other individual for the fact that seatbelts are now required in manufacturing cars in this country and a lot of others. But anyway, in the late 40s and early 50s, there were lots of these tests run, and they got a lot of publicity. And John Stapp became really famous. There are a lot of now older people who love science who, as a kid, idolized John Stapp for this and the other things he did. And he also was very charming and funny and apparently a really wonderful person. So at the press conference that was held, some reporter asked him, "You've been doing this series of extremely dangerous rides on this cart with a rocket. How is it you're still alive? Why weren't you killed?" And Stapp said, "It's because we paid a lot of attention to Murphy's Law." Apparently, that was really the first time that phrase was used, meaning that. And people have gone, Nick Spark, the historian, and other people have looked. And over the years, you can see in the record, it was mentioned a few times at that year. And then every year subsequent, more and more and more. So it all came from this. But it all came from this incident where people argue about what the hell exactly happened and what did it mean and what was said and what were the personalities and all that. So yeah, that was a posthumous thing to two of the three winners, and for something that happened more than 50 years before. And there have been quite a few others.
There are lots of wonderful stories about the Iggies, that's for certain.
Yep.
Peter M. wants to know, has anyone won both an Ig Nobel Prize and a Darwin Award?
Not that I'm aware of. The Darwin Awards, when they started, they were started by a bunch of different people on some websites that were copying each other. And it's never been clear that I know of that it was one person, but eventually one person did consolidate them. But in the early years, it was just a bunch of people swapping stories. And at least in the early years, it may have changed, but at least in the early years, not all those stories were real.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with the Ig Nobel Prizes is these people are real and they really did these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, my friend, I just noticed that we are moving along.
Oh yeah, and we've had no 8-year-old girl to stop us.
Yeah.
Because it's past her bedtime.
I don't think. Well, actually, we have not gone over our allotted time.
Oh, good.
So we are still open for more. Would you expect less from us? Tell us more. Tell us more. And there still is time to ask questions, listeners.
Okay.
So
I'll tell you about what's coming up this year.
Please do. That's important.
The 33rd first annual Ig Nobel Prize ceremony webcast will happen on September 14th. You can go to our website, improbable.com. You can watch it on YouTube and a bunch of other places. And that's when the new winners will be revealed. There's also a new opera and a bunch of other stuff that happens at the ceremony. We're all really eager to get back to doing it the way we used to, in a theater with an audience and all the winners and the other scientists, bouncing off each other and reacting to each other. And we didn't think we could quite pull it off this year for lots of reasons, with the effects of the pandemic still not, having really gone away. But we wanted to do it, so we decided we'll try something in addition. And we're having a second event. So we've kind of split it in two pieces. And the second event is going to happen 1 month later in October. And it's about something that we never allowed to happen on stage. Because when you have an event on stage with lots of people, time, is very precious. And something that we never allowed to happen was conversation, because it slows everything down. But during these past pandemic years, when we've been doing this stuff online, with parts of it done in advance in secret Zoom calls, while we were setting up, we were recording, and people were sitting there seeing each other. So they started to talk, and the conversations were just great. And so many really beautiful and hilarious things were happening that we included bits of those the last 3 years in the ceremony. And we started wondering, how can we do this stuff on stage? And we decided, let's have a separate event. And that's the whole event. And that's what we're going to do. We're calling it Ig Nobel Face to Face. Will happen on October 14th at Sanders Theater at Harvard, out here in Massachusetts. We're not going to webcast it live. We will record it, and sometime later we'll put a webcast of an edited version. It's most of the new winners who are really eager to come from around the world, and some other people who helped hand out the prizes. And it's just them asking each other questions about their work. We did a test run about a month and a half ago, I think 2 months ago.
Something like that, yeah.
At Stanford, and Jeannie was part of it. Jeannie's being very modest, sitting there, not quite owning up to this yet. Jeannie helped out.
Well, I'll admit it.
Yeah.
It was actually quite a bit of fun.
And a few people. We want to do a test run of this with an audience and see, does this work? And I thought it worked beautifully. We'd planned to go for an hour or something like that. And Jeannie, you may not know this, the audience was sitting there absolutely entranced. And when we stopped, because at some point figured, we really should stop. I know we've gone longer than we wanted to. We went something like 2.5 hours, which is, that's an hour longer than anything we ever want to do. But it was still working then. So it looks like this thing works quite well, and we're going to do it. So we're really excited, and we've got all kinds of organizing going on, heading for that. Plus, I've got some events. I'm starting to do a little more travel around the world. That all shut down with the pandemic. I used to spend about a quarter of the year traveling around the world doing events with Ig Nobel winners in many, many places. So we've got a few of those coming up this fall as well.
Good. Herb Masters wants to know, how does someone on our coast get to attend the ceremony? We're out here in California. I guess, can we tune in? You're gonna stream it, or
yeah, it'll be
we just have to get them later?
live streamed on Thursday night, September 14th. It'll be 6 p.m. on the East Coast, so 3 p.m. your time. And it will stay up there. So if you don't see it as it's happening, you can come at a later time or a later day. But if you want to come and be at the new face-to-face event, tickets will go on sale for that sometime over the summer. We're still, working out the details. And there are people who fly in from great distances every year to come and be in the audience and throw paper airplanes and dress up and talk to the winners and the other people.
If you're lucky enough to get tickets, actually.
Yeah. And also, we haven't announced this, but the people at Stanford who organized the test run we did are really great to work with and great organizers. And so we're planning at some point, probably within the next year, to have another face-to-face event at Stanford. So that one will be easier for you to get to. It won't have all the winners the way the one out here will, but we'll have some good people. And there are lots of past winners who do live in the Bay Area.
This is true. And you certainly have your collection of Nobel laureates that you can invite over. You didn't mention, when you were describing the Iggies, that people pay their own expenses. And there are people from Japan and Indonesia and Russia and all over the world who get Ig Nobel Prizes, and they're on their own dime. They are.
Well, we have no money.
They don't consider this to be an insult to have been granted an Ig Nobel. They
from it.
put their money where their awards are, so to speak.
We do try very hard. When anybody comes to the ceremony, we want to make sure they have an enjoyable time, and as far as I know, they always do. It's a very human experience in all the best ways. And even, we sometimes have very famous scientists up there helping to hand out the prizes. And I think even for them, it's a night off. Some of them get treated usually when they walk in a room like some kind of god or something. And it's, I think, a little rarity for them to be in a setting with a lot of people where they're just one more person getting to have fun and relax and be a person rather than be some kind of, fictional creature who's no longer human.
Some august personage. No, you can wear a silly hat. You don't have to be august the entire time.
Or you can wear nothing at all if you want.
Well, I have seen. I remember the fellow who was wearing hardly more than silver paint one time. I think that was, yes.
Yeah, silver. Jim Brett. Usually have two human spotlights, we call them, who paint themselves either silver or gold and hold a flashlight, or in British language, a torch, to illuminate the proceedings. And something I always like to point out to people is Jim Brett. Everybody you see on the stage at an Ig Nobel ceremony is an interesting person who's done lots of stuff, and some of it you might even know about. Jim Brett is one of the people who invented 3D printing, three-dimensional printing, when he was a grad student at MIT.
Jeez. And he's just having fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. No, I mean, I love your slogan. Makes you laugh and then makes you think. And that, I think, is is the absolute perfect phrase to describe what you've been doing for so many years. It is funny, necrophiliac dead ducks. I mean, it's just plain silly, but you can actually learn something about nature, something about how the universe works by contemplating the discoveries that these people have published. It's really quite wonderful. It's and no reason why you can't laugh while you're doing it. One I wants to know about the water molecule. I think this is somebody who might have tuned in a little bit late, so if you don't mind, there's another opportunity to give a plug for the for the fall.
So I'll repeat what these left right thing when you're looking into a screen is confusing. Every year we have a theme for the Ig Nobel Prize ceremony. The theme doesn't necessarily apply to the things that win, but to the other things we do, the opera and the other parts of the ceremony. And this year the theme is water. So I and other people in the ceremony will be wearing these little models of water molecules, H2O.
Very good.
Yeah, it'll be all sorts of stuff.
I think we probably should bring it to a close because it is pretty late on the East Coast, and we should really let you go.
Oh, okay. Well, I should mention, and I would like to mention, if you, not just you, Jeannie, but anybody else who's watching, if you ever run across somebody or hear of somebody who you're pretty sure should win an Ig Nobel Prize, they've done something that makes you laugh and then think, and you're pretty sure it will have that effect on almost anybody, just drop us a note. That's how we learn about almost every Ig Nobel Prize winner, is somebody somewhere notices and they tell us. So if you just do the usual thing of you tell your 3 best friends and then nobody else, you're depriving the world maybe of an Ig Nobel Prize winner, which would be a shame.
Indeed. And you haven't mentioned, and I will, that the Annals of Improbable Research is a publication to which you can subscribe and get a 6 times a year, I believe it is.
6 times a year. It's all in the form of a PDF, and it's really inexpensive. Just go to our website, improbable.com, and it's full of stuff has that same quality. There's a tremendous amount of stuff out there that most people never run across unless you read this magazine.
It's a very fun read. I do recommend it. See, I threw out the first pitch. There you go.
Thank you very much.
I do thank you profusely for joining us. This has been a lot of fun. It's the summer. We usually are pretty serious around Bay Area Skeptics. We deal with very serious issues, either of science or pseudoscience or conspiracies and various things that can sometimes be a little bit depressing. But, I think maybe we're going to start a tradition that a summer meeting, June or July, we're just going to have a little bit of fun. And so let's start off with you.
Let me suggest something for any skeptic who gets a little depressed sometimes at the things you're looking at. You can choose to look at anything in a variety of different ways. And one way, when you're looking at somebody whose behavior is depressing or irritating you, is to decide that maybe, intentionally or not, they're doing this for the entertainment of the rest of us. And they seem not to be aware of that. And that changes the whole way it can seem. Give that a try. Also, when you're stuck in traffic, rather than sit there and just curse, look at all that entertainment around you that people are working hard to do. It's a lot of efforts that's put there.
Indeed. Good advice. Hey, you were funny, but you also made us think. Let's look at it that way.
Okay, let's.
Thank you again. Thanks so much. Now, folks, I want you to hang in for just a second because I need to tell you what's coming up. What's coming up in July is summer vacation. We're going to take the month off, and you enjoy whatever you do in the summer, and we will see you in August. In August, we have a very special program for you that I think you're really going to enjoy. We have Nick Tiller coming on August. I had the date here a moment ago. It's disappeared. August 8, I think it is. The second Thursday in August as ever, who is going to be talking about sport and pseudoscience. Is sport a breeding ground for pseudoscience? I think he's got some very profound thoughts about that issue. As an exercise physiologist himself, he knows a lot about this topic. Join us for our October meeting. For our August meeting. Sorry, October is when the Ig Nobel Prizes are. The second thing I want to tell you about is a program that we just started this last month at Bay Area Skeptics to try to start bringing people together again. I think as skeptics, we miss a sense of community. And although Zooming is nice and the comments are nice and we can sort of correspond, and there is Skeptics in the pub, and that's good too. But I think many of us are ready to start spending some time together. So we have started live hanging out with programs. We had our first hanging out with program last month, and we hung out with Susan Gerbic and had a very interesting workshop with her about some of her very useful ideas of how to keep people who are at the edge of the rabbit hole from falling all the way in. And that was a very interesting experience. This month, on June 17, we're going to have another hanging out with live with come on, Jeannie. I'm laughing at myself. Hello, I'm back again with Leonard Tramiel, who many of you who are interested in the history of computers will recognize as part of the Tramiel family that founded Commodore Computers and Atari. And Leonard himself is a very prominent figure in the history of especially gaming and online computer usage. We are going to be meeting Leonard for a live hangout at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California at 11 o'clock on Saturday the 17th. I strongly urge you to come. Now, there is a cost for admission to the museum, but if you look at the social media that we have up on this event, which will be on our website, we'll have it on the Facebook page, we'll have it on Twitter and so forth. If you go to Groupon, you can get, I think it's a half price admission. So do check out Groupon, bring a friend. It's 2 or more people and you get the cheapo rate on Groupon. And join us for Leonard Tramiel and walk through the Computer History Museum with him and really get an understanding of the history of computers and of the contributions of the Tramiel family. And we'll have a little after party at that point. We'll have some social time in the probably the very nice restaurant that they have there. 11 o'clock on the 17th of this month of June. Come and see us then. And thanks so much for coming to the June Skep Talk. And I'll see you again in August. Bye.